everyone. Welcome to our second creativescience.io live stream. For those of you who are unfamiliar with us, creativescience.io is an online magazine covering sales, marketing, PR, and now tech as well. We are almost a year old. We'll turn a year old in June. And today we have with us Lukas Luft, who I'm super excited about talking to. I said on an earlier post on LinkedIn that this would change the way you think about content. And I know that's a pretty bold claim, but just talking to Lukas, he really did change my perspective on content. So I hope that for everyone listening that this is, a really challenging and illuminating conversation. But before we dive into the conversation, I'd like to introduce Sam, our senior contributor. Sam, would you like to say a little bit about yourself?
Of course. Thank you, Luke. I've been at Creative Science for just hit 8 months. It's been a fun experience, been able to write about a lot of different topics that I've been interested in, passionate about, especially in ad tech. So very grateful for that. Along the course of that journey, I met Lukas. So here we are a couple months later on a YouTube Live. So excited to dig in more. And with that, I'm happy to introduce Lukas Luft to this YouTube Live. So Lukas, can you introduce yourself to the YouTube as well as what is Peaklight, as well as any other details that might be interesting?
Sure. And first of all, thanks, Sam and Luke. Pleasure to be here on this podcast with you, talking about marketing, technology, and content, first and foremost. My name is Lukas Luft. I'm the founder of Peaklight. And honestly, I initially started Peaklight to solve my own pain point. I'm a passionate news reader. I closely follow what's happening in media and technology. And I'm also a very curious reader. So if I'm reading about, for example, Disney restructuring their organization and there's an executive mention that I don't know, I look them up. Preferably, I'd love to see their org chart or see an interview in which they explain their strategy so I can put these things that I'm reading into context and into perspective. So that has been really cumbersome to do, because you have to open a lot of different browser tabs, you go to different platforms and websites, they have different layouts and user interfaces, and you have to kind of learn how to use them and to find the information that you're looking for. So that costs you a lot of time. And Peaklight is our answer to that problem, where we're creating a context-first news platform for media and technology professionals, where we offer and provide news and analysis from some of the best specialized media and tech outlets in the industry. TVRef, The Medium, The Desk.net, What's New in Publishing, and many more. And what we do is we augment our partners' content by automatically surfacing related background information alongside a news story or analysis piece that a professional is reading. So this can be a chart on subscriber growth or revenue. It can be executive bios, podcast clips, or videos of industry analysts and media interviews. So that's, in a nutshell, is kind of the problem that we're addressing and the solution that we're building. And all of this ties back to my personal background and what I also experienced actually from a marketing perspective, because I started my career doing content marketing at Millward Brown, which is a global brand and ad research agency, part of the WPP network. And I saw how great content drives visibility and also how much gets wasted in very static formats back in the day and even today. So the majority of my career I actually spent in strategy consulting at Accenture, advising media, entertainment, and technology clients on business and tech transformations, business strategy, and much more. And I also co-authored big global media studies there. And I realized that each chart that we're creating and every data point can also live on its own and can be very valuable outside the full report. But there isn't really an infrastructure to surface those insights. So long story short, every role that I've been in, it showed me the same thing, that a lot of the best insights are often trapped or hidden in the wrong format and never reach the people who should see them and who get value out of it. So Peaklight is addressing my personal pain point as a newsreader, but it's also addressing some of the pain points that I've experienced as a marketeer.
That's great. And really quick, I just wanted to say that I hear a special guest in the background as well. When we were talking earlier that you're a new father, and we just wanted to congratulate you on air for that.
Yeah, thanks so much. And sorry for the background noise. It's unfortunately not something that's easily to control.
Yeah,
Fun
so
part of life.
you've worked across consulting, news platforms, and now Peaklight. What's one inflection point in your career that really changed how you think about content and distribution?
Yeah, I would say, I'm not sure if it was an inflection point, but rather over time, you kind of keep seeing the same things happening. And especially as a study author of for a big organization, I've seen so much work, month of work invested into creating reports, into creating insights, creating dozens of charts, thousands of data points. But then it's basically being published and promoted once over maybe a couple of months, and then it very quickly fades out. Sure, it's being presented to C-level executives for individual workshops and sessions, but and of course, it also kind of obtains attention to podcast invitations, etc. initially, but the shelf life usually is very short and it quickly fades out. And I've always experienced that there's so many interesting insights within a report that help contextualize something else that can be relevant long after the report is forgotten. So taking out all of these individual pieces and repackaging it, putting it next to something else would have been sometimes even more valuable to the users and to the audiences that you're trying to reach. So I would say that's kind of, for me, one of the biggest takeaways when it comes to content in my career.
That's really interesting. So when you look at a Peaklight power user, how would you like them to contextualize all these different types of content? There's 1,000 podcasts here and an article there and all these different types of pieces of content. How would you like a Peaklight power user to really organize all those content pieces?
Well, let's first maybe compare it to the status quo. On a traditional news website, you typically read an article and that's it. That's the end. Maybe sometimes there's a chart or a video embedded within the article, but you don't control the context. You have there's no discoverability beyond what's being curated for you. So you can look for something specifically that interests you or to answer your specific question that you have while reading a news article. So there's nothing to help close your knowledge gap beyond what an editor maybe have put inside or next to the news article. On Peaklight, reading is just the starting point of what we call a journey of insights discovery. So imagine you're reading all about Warner Brothers Discovery saga with Netflix and Paramount on Peaklight. What you would get while reading an analysis piece or a news article about that topic, we would, for example, surface a chart of our partner Data Access, and they have a chart showing the market share of all the different streaming providers. So you would immediately grasp what a combined Warner Brothers Discovery and Netflix entity would obtain in the market. And we would automatically show wiki bios of all of the involved executives, podcasts from the town analyzing the regulatory hurdles, or video appearances of Ted Sarandos explaining why eventually they didn't match the final Paramount bid. So that's kind of generally speaking how our solution works. But then if you go into a different story, into a different article, all of this context changes, all of the recommendations our technology does adjust to what you're reading. So you get different context insights. You click on any card and you get a full view with source attribution. No need to leave the platform. And of course, the big difference is you can follow our context recommendations if you want. But if you're looking for something specific, you can filter and search. If you have a targeted question, if you have a specific insight that you want to find, you are in control of this context experience. And even if you compare it not to a news website, but maybe to a Gen AI-driven search engine, surely they can give you context, but you have to know what to ask for. It's a very targeted approach. You have to ask a question, and then when you get a response, it's a black box. It's a polished paragraph. The original chart is gone. The expert voice is gone. The provenance is stripped. So you get an answer, but you lose the source and you can verify accuracy. So our approach is really to use AI to curate and surface original, unaltered sources, not generate summaries. So LLM-driven search engines, they can answer specific questions, but what we surface is often also the unknowns, things that you're aware of that you could be interested in.
Yeah, it really, as you were saying that, what really stood out to me is that sort of tension between the black box and how we used to consume content prior to the advent of AI. And I think you're really trying to find a balance there. Could you talk a little bit more about how AI is altering news consumption? What is your objective in shaping news consumption in an AI environment?
Yeah, great question. And I mean, the news industry is at an inflection point for sure. And it's very similar to actually AI is doing to journalism what Napster did to the music industry, in the sense that it's unbundling without permission, or largely without permission. And on the consumer side, this means people go to ChatGPT instead of a publisher. AI gives a summary, strips attribution in the majority of cases, and journalism loses its audience and revenue. So on the publisher side, this leads to ad traffic declining. Ad models are under pressure, but even subscription models are under pressure if you don't kind of get enough audiences into your funnel. And your original reporting is becoming raw material for something different that you have no influence over on different platforms. So it's being hollowed out, and there's a risk of many publishers becoming commodity providers, being basically feeding their reporting into Gen AI search engines. So the question is, for publishers, and also for business influencers or creators on different platforms, how do you make your offering more valuable? How do you increase the experience to make it more sophisticated and relevant to your audiences? So our perspective, of course, is that AI can serve as the engine that helps you connect better with readers and help them understand what you're reporting on or what you're analyzing, by providing context at scale that's personalizable and discoverable. So that's kind of curated context alongside journalism to elevate it. In that way, journalism stays the centerpiece, or the article stays the centerpiece. So we are providing infrastructure for publishers, and we try to create an ecosystem that serves everyone in the industry to compete with Gen AI search engines, making journalism more valuable.
Got it. So I've been hearing about liquid content in terms of all these different types of publishers, and there's so much content pieces going on. And how do you personally define liquid content? And what's one example that immediately clicks when people hear it?
Yeah. So for us, we define liquid content as basically the smallest self-contained unit that flows to wherever it's relevant without being altered. So for us, liquid means it travels freely, but it doesn't dissolve. It can be a chart, it can be a small video clip, it can be a bio, it can be a data visualization. The key idea for us is that it stays whole, that there's attribution, that it can be linked to a source, and that it's visually intact. However, we should also say that that's not necessarily the definition when it comes to large language models and LLM-driven search engines. Their liquid content is effectively content that gets ingested, blended with many different other things, and then it gets dissolved into some output that may or may not be true. So the original source disappears, the attribution is stripped, the creator often gets nothing. So for me, that's almost not liquid. It's like an evaporation. So for us, we really try to maintain original assets so that the creator can maintain its identity and messaging. But it is a much smaller unit than maybe traditionally being provided by marketeers, by publishers, and creators. So you can think of it like a water bottle versus that can kind of travel to all of the distant places and remote areas versus maybe liquid water in infrastructure as a utility where you need a pipeline and kind of whole infrastructure to be brought to different places, but you don't know where this water is coming from, if it's safe to drink. So that would probably be kind of the closest analogy. But you can also think it, to give a practical example, I've always been very fascinated by publishing in the fashion industry. Take Vogue, for example. Fashion ads there, when you're reading Vogue magazine, it reaches someone already in that world, and it's valuable and it's perceived as content because it's contextually relevant to what you're doing. Versus just kind of stripping this into pieces. Of course, it's different kind of in a physical world now, moving into a digital AI driven world. But generally, that's kind of how we differentiate between, or how we define liquid content.
Excellent. For somebody running a media brand or newsletter today, what's the first practical shift they should make if they want to move from static content to truly liquid content?
Yeah, I think that's very important because, first of all, it becomes a mindset shift from where do we publish to where can our best assets live outside of our own channels. And the first practical step to take is understand what is the best insight from your last quarter, for example, and try to break it down into the smallest self-contained unit, whether it's a chart, an audio clip, a short video, an infographic, and try to communicate your key message or insight in under 10 seconds. You add attribution, whether it's your brand, your source, a link back, and you try to create as many assets from this one input as possible. And you can even create different permutations. Maybe if you have data, and depending on how you package it, it becomes relevant for different audience segments or kind of consumer groups. So with AI, it's very easy nowadays to create many different outputs from the same input, and in different color schemes and in different formats, and highlighting different aspects of the insight. Maybe one that's relevant for the media professionals, another that's interesting for consumer goods. So I think that's kind of the first step. But there's also an underlying strategic imperative, because Gen AI search engines are already doing this to your content, whether you like it or not, and whether you want them or not. So they're breaking it apart and summarizing it on your behalf. So if you do it yourself, at least you maintain a certain level of influence over your message and brand identity. So you control how your insights travel instead of letting an algorithm decide in a black box what's appearing and what that's communicating to your audiences. And then there's also of course, the technological layer, because you need to set up your infrastructure to make your content portable so that it travels to distant places that maybe you haven't even considered, but where audiences are interested in your content and in your messaging. So for bigger companies or even mid-sized companies, you can think about creating public APIs that anyone can basically access and use your content and to augment it, to create context to whatever they are creating. If you have kind of more, I would say, if you better want to guard where your content flows, of course, you can also set up private APIs and have specific agreements with platforms where you feel like it's safe for your content to travel to. But you can also, for example, offer embeddable widgets that business creators can implement in their Substacks or their platform, embed in their context technology. So that is moving the needle drastically, because there have people have distributed individual smaller units before on social media, but now you need scale. So you need to kind of drive this through technology to make it easy for other platforms and creators to use your content and contextualize whatever they're creating. So take your best assets, make them addressable, deliverable. Don't lock them inside a big report PDF or a single landing page. Make it easy for this bottle to reach the remote places of Earth and create value, instead of having AI summarize what you've done and you don't have any control over how that's being displayed.
That's a really interesting point, because even when I'm scrolling on social media, sometimes I'm wondering if is this video created by AI? Is it real? And I think that's really interesting, especially when looking at news content, whatever's happening in the world, and you're looking at it, it's like, is it even real? So I think that's the real value of Peaklight, is that it's pulling from verified source content that you know where it's coming from. You can link back to it directly, as opposed to this image might be fake altogether. This article might be fake altogether. Everything here might be created by AI, and we don't even know if it's real. But Peaklight only looks at verified publisher information, right?
Right. And I mean, to give you an example, as I was also doing market research recently, Gen AI search engines cited different studies. And then I thought, like, oh, wow, this is great. This is basically, giving me the data point. It's giving me the study provider and the year. And then when I went back a year later, just to kind of make sure that everything is really accurate, I realized, okay, the study exists, but the report is much older than the Gen AI engine told me. That already changes the narrative and the trend. So, sometimes you get data point and there is some kind of attribution that is right. But if it's kind of misrepresenting the context and the year, there's a huge risk, especially for professionals citing and using this. It can basically screw up their career if they're using this for C-level executive presentations, and then, this is actually not accurate. So we're trying to address this by really surfacing unaltered context. Certainly, we're using AI, we're using Gen AI as the underlying technology to surface relevant information and context. But we're really trying to show the unaltered, small, self-contained units that the brands and publishers and data research providers wanted out there.
That's really interesting, because it sounds like AI is helping prioritize the feed, if I can call it the Peaklight feed, in terms of prioritizing the pieces of content that goes to each topic. Like you're looking at Netflix, it goes to the Wikipedia summary, it goes to a podcast talking about Netflix in terms of verified content. So this might be the toughest question of the of our video yet, but I'm going to ask you to make a prediction for the next 5 years in terms of, we have so much content now, and we're probably going to get even more content over the next couple of years, next 5 years. So what do you think the media landscape is going to look like, especially with now anyone can make content in a blink, in a couple of seconds? So what do you think the media landscape will look like then?
Yeah, I mean, let me maybe start with kind of how we're imagining Peaklight to address this and serve this, because we want to create a unified research layer for all of this context, especially as more content is being generated. And if these units become smaller, there needs to be some kind of curation and discoverability providing this to users. So we want to become the research layer across all industry reading for professionals. We want publishers to produce those structured assets, and then we can surface it whenever it becomes relevant, and giving brands the earned visibility with provenance, with citation, and not just through ad spend. And best journalism becomes more valuable through all of this. But consumption, of course, is going to evolve, because it then means that, it's not about commoditized reading experience anymore, but it's about research becomes the default. And this is regardless of news consumption. I think it's true for whatever website you're going to be on. You're expecting by default to have a research layer. And whether it's, kind of using Perplexity or Claude as a kind of a side panel when you're browsing a website, or it's, on a platform like Peaklight with an embedded contextualization engine, regardless of where it happens, how it happens, I think research becomes the default. You always want to have an assistant available that you can ask questions or that can surface relevant context for you to better understand what's happening. But I would also say, kind of from a Peaklight perspective and an industry perspective as a whole, so we are moving from what I call a content fit, where we're matching the right context to the right story. We're evolving more to a context user fit, where it's more personalized, where it's really depending on surfacing the context based on the user, based on the reader, meaning that some people will prefer audiovisual context, a podcast clip or a video interview. But there are other people, they want maybe an easily digestible chart because they don't want to kind of spend or get distracted by listening to a 30-minute podcast while they're reading a news article. So everyone has different interests, but also different knowledge gaps depending on the topic or the specific story. Some people know more about, Netflix, Warner Brothers saga. Some people maybe just started reading about it. So we need to take this into account to surface what's relevant to close the knowledge gap that these people have. Streaming executive reading about a Disney restructuring needs a different background than a junior analyst reading the same article. So as we integrate more context types, as personalization becomes more critical, the platform needs to learn what fills your gaps, not just what's topically relevant. So that's where real value compounds over time. And I think we're already seeing this in different industries and different products to different extents. But it is definitely something that's going to accelerate. And it's something that clearly compound and has impact on professionals, on publishers, on brands marketing their content. So lastly, I think in terms of, as you're asking about the vision and the future, as I believe that research becomes the default on any platform, we also want to license out our contextualization technologies to publishers, to websites, to help this trend. So we imagine any news outlet effectively embedding our research layer and our contextualization technology on their website, on their news platforms, to give their readers richer context, help drive retention and engagement, and giving them an opportunity to compete with Gen AI search engines on experience, not just content. So that instead of losing readers to ChatGPT, Perplexity, they can give readers a reason to stay. So it's really all about staying competitive in this drastically changing Gen AI landscape, not by fighting AI, but by using it to make your content more valuable where it already lives.
Excellent. We could keep talking to you about this all day, but I think that's a really great note to end on. Lukas, thank you so much for joining us, and thank you to everyone who tuned in. Don't forget, you can follow creativescience.io on LinkedIn, on Substack, and if you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and also hit the like button on this video. We'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.